Reuben Frank, Dave Zangaro and Andrew Kulp continue the 2019 edition of Stay or Go, trying to figure out the future of the Philadelphia Eagles. Today, they look at the safeties, Malcolm Jenkins Roob. After 5 seasons, 3 Pro Bowls, 0 missed games, a Super Bowl and half a decade of leadership, it's safe to say Malcolm Jenkins is an all-time great Eagle. Definitely headed for the Eagles Hall of Fame. This may have been his best year as he held it down as the only constant in a chaotic secondary. Hope he finishes his career here. Verdict, stays Dave. It's hard to imagine where the Eagles would be without Jenkins. He plays every snap, he plays multiple positions, he was the veteran force on a secondary that was decimated by injuries. He's one of the most important players on the team. It's hard to overstate how important he is. Verdict, stays Kulp. The heart and soul of the Eagles' defense, Jenkins played every snap this season. He's indispensable, both on the field and as a locker room leader. And in case anybody feels different about Jenkins at 31, trade or release only creates about $2 million in savings. Verdict, stays Rodney McLeod Roob. This is one of the tougher calls of the offseason. McLeod is really solid and forms a great safety tandem with Malcolm Jenkins. And he's only 28. But he's coming off a season-ending injury. He's got that $7.5 million salary and $9.9 million cap hit, and the Eagles need cap space. Will they cut ties with him? Bring him back at a lower salary? It's going to be tempting to move Avonte Maddox to safety, cut ties with McLeod and clear much-needed cap room. Tough call. Verdict, goes Dave. This is a tough one because McLeod's cap hit is over $9 million in 2019, and that's a lot for a player coming off an ACL tear. But I think he and the Eagles can figure something out to keep him around. Losing him last season was a big loss. He's still just 28 and has some good football ahead of him. Verdict, stays Kulp. McLeod is somebody fans might have taken for granted prior to this season, but you saw what a mess the secondary became after he went down in the 3rd game. He provides a lot of stability on the back end. The Eagles only save $5 million, or roughly half of McLeod's cap hit, in the event of his trade or release, so knowing what we do now, I would be real hesitant to move on. Verdict, stays Corey Graham Roob. Graham played way more than he could have imagined when he re-upped with the Eagles a week into training camp. There was 4th and 15 against the Titans, but as the year went on he played better. But Graham turns 34 before training camp starts and has 12 years in the books. I think he calls it a career. Verdict, goes Dave. He was pretty close to retiring after the 2017 season, but decided to come back and eventually played well in 2018 after that 4th and 15 in Tennessee. But he made it pretty clear throughout the season that he wasn't going to play much longer. I think he retires. Verdict, goes Kulp. Was solid as the Eagles' 3rd safety in 2017, looked like a 33-year-old defensive back in 2018. Graham simply doesn't possess the range he used to, and the diminished athleticism got him into trouble a few times last season. He's a free agent, and I imagine headed for retirement unless another team is in really dire straits. Avonte Maddox is the new 3rd safety. Verdict, goes DeAndre Hall Roob. Hall barely played on defense, 6 snaps all year, but was a core special teamer for Dave Phipp and is under contract at minimum wage $720,000 in 2019, so unless the Eagles draft a safety to play that 4th safety, special teams role, which is certainly possible, I'd expect Hall to be back next year simply because of his special teams ability. Verdict, stays Dave. It was telling that even when the Eagles needed help at safety, they refused to play Hall. But he's a big special teams guy and you need to have a few of them. Verdict, stays Kulp. Played only 6 snaps on defense, which is kind of incredible given all the injuries in the secondary. But Hall became a major contributor on special teams as the year went on, which is apparently what the Eagles were hoping when they traded a 7th-round pick to the Bears in September. He's under contract and inexpensive for 1 more year. Verdict, stays Trey Sullivan Roob. Sullivan went from the practice squad to barely playing to a key rotational D-back during the course of the season, and by the postseason was playing at a high level and getting than 60% of the defensive snaps while continuing to take a huge load on special teams. He really showed tremendous improvement as the year went on. These are the kind of guys you need on the roster, talented and cheap, $570,000 salary next year. Verdict, stays Dave. Kind of a crazy season for Sullivan. He made the initial 53, but then lost his job when Hall came off suspension. But by the end of the season, he was back on the 53 and contributing on defense. The Eagles probably need some more help at this position, but either way, I think Sullivan has the inside track on a roster spot. Verdict, stays Kulp. Sullivan was on the field quite a bit during the Eagles' stretch run, surprising considering some of the bonehead plays he made earlier. Yet, by the end, he seemed to be doing a decent enough job. If nothing else, Sullivan will enter his second NFL season as a cheap backup with regular season and playoff game experience. Verdict, stays. Click here to download the My Teams app by NBC Sports. Receive comprehensive coverage of your teams and stream the Flyers, Sixers and Phillies games easily on your device. More on the Eagles. We're in full mock draft season. Everyone will take a stab, multiple stabs, at trying to predict what will happen in the first round of the NFL draft in a couple months, so we're doing our best to track them. The Eagles hold the 25th pick in the draft, and likely 8 picks after that, so let's take another stroll around the internet to see who several experts have them taking at 25. NFL.com, Lance Zierlein, Dexter Lawrence. DT, Clemson. Here's what they said. Elodie Nada's due to hit the market this offseason, and will Timmy Jernigan be back in 2019? There could be an opening or two at DT, which would clear the way for Lawrence, who flashes the ability to manhandle opponents. C.com. Callan Caller Dexter, Lawrence. DT, Clemson. Here's what they said. Lawrence is primarily an early down run stuffer, but he has a rare combination of size and athleticism and has flashed upside in the pass rush. His gargantuan body type is really hard to find, 6 feet 4 inches, 350 pounds, which makes him an intriguing pick for the Eagles, whose recent success has come in large part from investing heavily in offensive and defensive lines. NFL.com, Bucky Brooks. Dexter Lawrence. DT, Clemson. Here's what they said. The Eagles have joined the ranks of the NFL elite by investing heavily in the offensive and defensive lines. Lawrence is a rugged nose tackle with the size and strength to erase runs between the guards while also collapsing the pocket with bull rushes on passing downs. My take on Lawrence? Okay, so this seems to be the most popular pick as we sit here in late January. In my first Eagles-only mock draft, I actually had them taking Lawrence's teammate Christian Wilkins. I actually think Wilkins would be a better fit with the Eagles, but that doesn't mean Lawrence isn't a good and intriguing prospect. Lawrence is bigger and is known as more of a run stuffer, but he still is pretty athletic for as big as he is. That Clemson team is likely to have 3 defensive linemen drafted in the first round, and the Eagles would probably be happy to get any of them. The Birds definitely need some help along the defensive line, and the good news is that the DL is a real strength of this draft class. CBS Sports. Brian Wilson. Deontay Thompson, Alabama. Here's what they said. Thompson is one of the best safeties in this class, and he would solidify an Eagles secondary that was replacement level in pass defense, according to Football Outsiders. My take on Thompson: he's probably the best safety in this draft class. He's an absolute playmaker and worthy of a first-round pick. While the Eagles have taken quite a few safeties in the second round over the years, they've never taken a safety in the first round. They haven't taken a DB of any kind in the first round since Lito Shepherd in 2002. But depending on what happens with Rodney McLeod and his expensive cap hit, the Eagles could be in the market for a cheap but talented replacement. CBS Sports. RJ. What N'Keal Harry, WR. Arizona State. Here's what they said. The Eagles could go in a few different directions, but one area of concern is at wide receiver, where they traded for Golden Tate during the season to give them a boost despite him hitting free agency this offseason. Harry is in the mix to be the first player at his position off the board as a potentially dominant outside receiver with great hands. If he has a big combine, he could shoot up the first-round projections. My take on Harry: he's 6'3" and nearly 220 pounds and has a lot in common with Alshon Jeffrey in that he can go up and win those 50-50 balls. Not sure he'd be a perfect fit with the Eagles in 2019 because of that, but he's definitely a really good receiver, who put up big numbers at Arizona State and would be worthy of a first-round pick. The Eagles have Jeffrey and Nelson Agholor under contract, so a cheap third option through the draft or free agency would make sense. USA Today Draft Wire: Luke Easterling, DeAndre Baker, CB, Georgia. Here's what they said: Philly's lack of depth at corner was painfully evident as injuries stacked up down the stretch last season, and this offseason gives them a chance to address it. Baker is a tough, instinctive player with a nose for the ball who could become an instant starter. My take on Baker: well, down the stretch, I thought the Eagles' depth at corner was evident. Rasul Douglas and Avonte Maddox played well. Craven LeBlanc was a revelation, and next season Jalen Mills will be back from injury. Sidney Jones should be healthy, and all of a sudden, the Eagles have a stable group of young cornerbacks even if Ronald Darby walks. That's not to say they won't draft one. I guess it's possible, but the Eagles, as I said earlier, haven't drafted a cornerback in the first round since 2002. They love drafting offensive and defensive linemen, and they seem to have needs at both of those spots, so that's the way I tend to think they're leaning. Click here to download the My Teams app by NBC Sports. Receive comprehensive coverage of your teams and stream the Flyers, Sixers and Phillies games easily on your device. More on the Eagles. Eagles fans should probably feel a little conflicted about the Chip Kelly era, because on one side, it obviously never lived up to the hype. Chip Kelly, the GM, ended up getting Chip Kelly, the coach, fired. And Chip Kelly, the person, didn't do him any favors either. But if Kelly's time in Philadelphia didn't turn into an utter disaster in less than 3 years, then the Eagles don't end up with Doug Peterson. Howie Roseman doesn't get back GM power. They don't get Carson Wentz. Nick Foles doesn't come back with a new outlook, etc. That doesn't mean it hurts any less when fans look back and see some real favorites and real talents that Kelly ousted from those teams. Two of those players Kelly inherited, Mike Vick and Deshaun Jackson, were on the Sims and Lefkoe podcast on Bleacher Report this week, and they talked about their relationships with Kelly. Vick even told a story about being in tears during his QB competition with Nick Foles. The whole video is worth a watch. The complaint from Vick and Deshaun is a common one about Kelly. He just valued his system more than the players, which worked for him at Oregon, but the NFL is a players' league. Teams need star players to succeed in the NFL, where talent rules, and Adam Lefkoe is right. Having Vick and Jackson and McCoy and Maclin should have made Kelly's offense hum. And it did for a short time, but then it all got demolished. Ultimately, things worked out for the Eagles, though. Here to download the My Teams app by NBC Sports. Receive comprehensive coverage of your teams and stream the Flyers, Sixers and Phillies games easily on your device. More on the Eagles.